This is Duke University.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight it is my honor to introduce General Martin E. Dempsey, the 18th Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and fellow Duke grad. General Dempsey recently retired after 41 years of service in the military, and in 2015 was recognized as one of Time magazine's 100 most influential leaders in the world. General Dempsey graduated from West Point Academy in 1974 and went on to earn master's degrees from Duke in literature, from the Army Command and General Staff College in military science, and from the National War College in national security strategy. He also has an honorary doctorate degree in law from Notre Dame University. General Dempsey's strong belief in authentic engagement and uncompromising integrity have earned him multiple awards and honors throughout his 41-year career, including the Bronze Star with Valor Device, the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, and the Distinguished Service Medals from the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Coast Guard. He has also received awards from allied countries and other departments in the United States government, including the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the National Security Agency. Since his retirement, the General has secured a teaching position here at Duke University in public policy and leadership, a role as a special advisor to the Commissioner of the National Basketball Association for leader and development in youth programs, and motivational speaking roles throughout Washington Speakers Bureau. Please join me in extending a warm fecal welcome to General Martin Dempsey.
Thank you. I didn't know I was going on Charlie Rose. Here we go.
So, General Dempsey, it is an incredible privilege for us to have you be a part of our community and to be able to talk to you today. And so after a fairly low-profile career, how does it feel to really step into the spotlight as a university professor?
It's intimidating, and I spent most of today grading papers. Anybody in this auditorium in my class? Oh, yeah, of course you are. Yeah. You're doing fine. Keep it up. Yeah. I mean, I taught English back at West Point from '84 to '87, and I'd forgotten how much work it is to actually be and I'm not a professor. I'd love to be one, but I'm a fellow. I would never try to describe myself as a professor because I haven't earned that. But I have earned a certain gravitas, I suppose, in leader development, and I'm really excited to be here to share that.
Yeah. So I want to go back in time and explore this remarkable journey that you've had, starting with your decision to go to West Point. Mm-hmm. You come from, I think you told me that all four of your grandparents were from Ireland, right. And so it's not like you came from a tradition of military service, at least in this country. So what led to your decision to go to West Point?
Some of you, if I've had the occasion to be with you before, I often reflect on the fact that history finds you, you don't find it. And this is one of the reasons I believe that, because I had no interest, I mean no interest in going to West Point. In fact, I was rather emotionally against the idea. And what happened was that I got into the class that is now known to be the easiest class in history. No, I'm not making this up. I entered in 1970, and it was right after the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, and we were taking horrible casualties, and the war was as probably the most unpopular war in history. And so they were desperate to fill the ranks. And I got an appointment, and I had already applied to several other places. I was enrolled I was going to go to Manhattan College in New York City and get a law degree. And the appointment came very late, which means that it was an appointment that was given to me because whoever had actually received it initially changed their mind. So on the 27th of June, I was told I had to report to West Point on the 1st of July. And so I was with my wife at the time, who wasn't my wife at the time. She was my girlfriend at the time. And I was at her house, and my mother called and said, "You need to come home. I have great news. You've been accepted to the military academy." I said, "Well, Mom, that's not really good news because I have no intention of going." She said, "Just please come home and talk about it." So I did. And my father was there, she was there. My sisters and brothers were kind of huddled around because they knew where this was going. And I said, "No, Mom, look, I know you have every good intention. I know it's a wonderful place. I just have no interest in it." And she cried. And I thought to myself, son of a gun. I just cleaned that up for you, by the way. And I said, "Okay, look, I can't stand to see you sitting here crying, so I'll go to the summer part of it, but I'm coming home at the end of the summer, and I'm going to Manhattan." And she said, "Well, thank you just for trying it." So I went, and on the first day, they have this, the military's all about rituals, and they had this ritual where there would be an upperclassman meet you and begin the process of harassing you, which didn't end that day. It extended into the rest of my experience. But it began on that day, and I'll never forget, this upperclassman said to me, he looked at me and he said, "You know what, you're never gonna make it here." And I said, "Yes, sir, I am." And I said, "Well, wait a minute, I don't even want to be here." And honestly, that was it. It wasn't anything more profound than that. It was my mother broke down in tears, and I decided to give it a try, and here I am.
So you gave it a try, and you kind of came out and had your first posting. Did you think at that point in time that this was going to be a career, or were you the same way? Like, I'm going to get through my duty here, and then I'm going to move on to something else?
Yeah, and looking back on that, Dean, it's like the famous phrase, looking through a glass darkly. I mean, I have memories of those early days, and I think my basic instinct was that if I'd been given this responsibility, and by the way, that first assignment was as a cavalry platoon leader on what was the border between Czechoslovakia and West Germany. So we were patrolling NATO's side of the border, and the Soviets and their surrogates were patrolling the other side of the border. And it was quite a bit of responsibility for a young 22, 23-year-old. And I remember, kind of being inspired by the level of responsibility. And also I found myself becoming kind of committed and invested in the success of the 30 or 40 young men that I had with me. And so I think what happened was that I, at some level, began to be fond of leadership, fond of trying to make people do something more than they think they can do and do it together, which makes them bigger and more effective than the sum of their individual parts. But I don't think I was aware of that at that time. I mean, again, I'm looking backwards at it, but I think that's what kind of we talk about lighting people's fire. When I talk to young officers about how they should approach their first job, I tell them, do two things. One is try to light someone's fire. Try to find people in that organization who are not living up to expectations and try to change that. And I said, secondly, allow your fire to be lit by some leader who you find to be a role model. And if you do that, if you find role models who you admire, so you want to, I used to use the phrase, find somebody who you want to be like when you grow up. And if you can try to inspire people who work for you to do the same. I said, the rest of it's not magic. Leadership really isn't magic.
Yeah. So I assume that you had many role models that you worked with over the years who became great mentors. What about the bad officers that you worked with who had the ability to change your life? Where did you learn the most, from the good ones or the bad ones?
Yeah, I don't know that I could put a quantifiable value judgment on, but I have served for both officers who I thought had it right, or what I thought right looked like. And I have worked for some who I didn't think had a particularly proper. And by the way, I was blessed never to serve with anyone who was doing anything illegal or immoral, but I did serve with some officers who were corrosive, who didn't care about team building, kind of draconian, not very good at communications, kind of self-serving, self-promotional. And you know what I did is I took stock, and again, don't get me wrong now, I'm a lot smarter today than I was. I mean, you have to get a little smarter as you get older, right? Or something's wrong. But as I look back on it, I think what I did was I took stock in what made me uncomfortable about working for that person. That became kind of a, I had like two tool bags. This tool bag is the positive leadership attributes that are available. And this tool bag is the negative leadership attributes. And I tried to, stay clear of the negative and emphasize the positive. But don't get me wrong. I mean, you mentioned I am Irish, and Irish are notorious for having a bad temper. And there were moments in my career where I probably blew a gasket, and after the fact, probably realized that that's not what I should have done at the time. And by the way, this is before Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, which is tougher now, by the way. I mean, look, if my wife were here, she'd be going like this. But I've done things in my career, not illegal or immoral, but probably stupid, and I got away with it because there was nobody there with an iPhone. You don't have that luxury.
Yeah. So if we go back again to when you started your journey, you noted the Vietnam War. So at the time you went into the military academy, into West Point, the military was not held in extremely high regard.
Right.
It was a really tough time. Society was in turmoil. And now we fast forward all these years, and the military is now the most respected institution in this country, and yet society is still in turmoil. And so what happened in those intervening years that the military was able to build trust and confidence with society, with some kind of social contract, when we still see lots of turmoil?
Well, first of all, we had some leaders with vision and recognized where we had kind of let things slip, discipline slip, and race relations slip, and other things in that period of Vietnam. But Vietnam was just, it wasn't a bad war, but it was badly managed, and it came at a time of significant social change in our country, and the nexus of those two influences was unbelievable. But we had some visionaries in those years. The other thing that happened to us is we did away with the draft. So I get asked all the time, I don't mean to have my back to you, by the way. I get asked all the time, whether I think we should go back to a draft. And in order to draw a greater, I guess the key would be greater commitment, right, from the country. But I don't think that's the case. I think that the fact that we have a force of volunteers allows us to tell a volunteer things that you can't tell someone who you've impressed into service. And what I mean by that is we now take young men and women who volunteer to serve their country in military, and we present to them a sense of belonging. We present to them an ethos that we expect them to accept and embrace and live to. And if they don't, then we don't any longer need their services in our profession, and they know that. And so the combination of having these leaders in the 70s and 80s with a vision for what the profession could be, and then having this opportunity to mold a professional force, which does have its limitations, but in terms of its behavior and its relationship with the country, it's a far better force than one where we would be telling people on an involuntary basis to serve their country.
So if business is voluntary, right?
Yeah.
And so if we had some visionary business leaders, do you think that we could restore some of the trust in the institution of business in this country?
Yeah, yes, the short answer is yes. But when is the last time a general gave a short answer? Right? So, no, I do, and I see it. It's out there. You know, just like the military, you know, we go through our scandals, and when you go through a scandal or a crisis, you have to both triage and correct the immediate problem, but then there's always an opportunity there. I mean, in every crisis, there is an opportunity. You have to see it, you have to take advantage of it, and you have to change the organization. And we, you know, look, as recently as 5 or 6 years ago, we went through a series of crises. And what we realized was we'd become so overwhelmingly engaged in the conflict against, you know, in Iraq and Afghanistan and now extended, that we'd stopped emphasizing our ethos, we'd stopped talking about being professionals, we'd stopped sending young men and women back for continuing education so they could kind of, you know, remember and rekindle what it means to be in the military. We saw that. When we had the crisis, we had to fix the immediate problem, but we also said, okay, maybe from this crisis we can learn, and we did. I think that's happening in the business world. By the way, I think that you all, I live in Raleigh now, so that's the way I talk. I think you all will, I think it's going to be a really exciting time to be leading in business, because for both the reason that the dean suggested, which is to say, I think there's a general recognition that it's not any longer just good enough to increase the top line or avoid the bottom line. I really do. I think every place I go, leaders are more, in every walk of life, are more interested in what it means to develop young men and women of character and leaders of consequence, some better than others. I also think, as the dean and I were just talking in his office, I think there's a change afoot in the country where business is having a greater influence on social responsibility than ever before. You know, take a look at all of the reaction to the HB2 law and some of the pressures being brought on local government. Some of which are, you know, by the way, some would argue that's a bit of a process foul in our system of government. You know, that, for example, the NCAA a sporting association would roll in on top of a state and try to influence it. But that's the world we're living in, I think. Meaning, I think more and more influencers, different influencers, will try to put pressure, especially when government fails.
Yeah. So you had mentioned that maybe you took the eye off this important aspect of continuing to educate and develop people, and I know that you are a passionate believer in lifelong education. So one of the things that you did was you came to Duke and you got a master's degree in English. So why Duke and why English?
Well, I wish I had I wish this would be a really inspirational answer to those questions. But, well, why Duke? Basketball, right? I mean, you know, you gotta. No, seriously, I was a impressionable, I was like many people, an aspiring collegiate athlete. I did play college lacrosse, but in a very uninspiring way. But I was always a huge basketball fan. And so the first thing happened was they said, would you like to go back to the military academy and teach? Now, mind you, I had an engineering degree, and so I thought they were going to ask me to go back in the mathematics department or, you know, systems engineering or something. They said, we're really looking for somebody in history or English. And I said, well, you know, I mean, I did okay in those, but I didn't ever see it as a lifelong commitment. But I said, sure. You know, it seemed like the right thing to do at that point in my career, to do something to broaden my horizon. And I chose English, by the way. There's a 19th century humorist right at the end of the 19th century, 1895 or so, by the name of Finley Peter Dunne out of Chicago. He was a journalist, actually. And Finley Peter Dunne, Irishman, shockingly, was asked, you know, what's the difference between studying history and studying English? And Finley Peter Dunne said, he was a fictional character, by the way, but Finley Peter Dunne said, well, The study of history is the study of what people died of. The study of literature is a study of what they lived of. And I thought that was really an interesting way to think about it. And so I plowed off into the study of literature, believing that I would learn more about people. And at the end of the day, leadership is about people. And so I thought that that would broaden my experience base in terms of, kind of living vicariously through these characters. And then I knew for sure it would make me a much better writer, and it did. And I thought it would make me a better reader. Now, history would have done that as well, but it also made me a better reader. So, I'm going through these papers now like an unbelievable clip, because I can read them at a rate that, exceeds my peers maybe. But in any case, that's how I ended up in English, and I ended up at Duke because I was, I thought, wow, ECC basketball, East Coast, let's give that a shot. But then I fell, like most things in life, you go for one reason and you find yourself appreciating them for quite another.
Yeah. So do you feel like the English degree has made you a better leader over time?
I get asked that all the time, and what I tell people is, I don't know if it made me a better leader. It gave me some metaphors. Here we go. You brought it up. It gave me some metaphors to help explain things. And one of the things that a leader has to do, in fact, in this course we're teaching here, we talk about the responsibility of the leader to make sense of things for those that are employees or subordinates or, who work for the leader. The leader has to make sense of things for them.
So in the past, you've said that a career in the military or simply service in the military offers four things: belonging, meaning, variety, and memories. So for you, focusing on memories, what are the best memories that you take away from that experience?
Yeah, boy, that's almost impossible to answer, and what I mean by that is, I think one of the most important qualities of a leader in any field is to give your I'll use employees, give your employees memories. Memories of what right looks like, memories of what success feels like, memories of what failure feels like or looks like. And you can do it in any number of ways, but as a leader, the act of you giving them memories is what will actually cause them to share your vision at some point in time, share your commitment, share your values. So, for example, the quality or the attribute of trust, which is really the foundation of any organization. Any organization will either succeed or fail based on the degree to which it trusts itself. That's abstract. What does that mean? Well, there's ways to get at that. There's ways to as a leader, to demonstrate tangibly that you trust someone. I was reading in one of my students' papers today where he was doing an internship, and one of the leaders of the organization said to him, they were at a point to make a decision about something, and they said, have you read this paper? Yes, sir, I have. Do you agree with it? Yes, sir, I do. Okay, well, I trust your judgment. We'll do that. And that simple act of trust gave that young man, as it turns out, a memory about what that feels like that now will make him a better leader, because he'll understand how to make sense. I had, you might expect this, but I had a constant parade quality length of people coming in and out of my office when I was the chairman. And if you're not careful, you can become kind of insensitive to the whole thing. And I always tried to remind myself that young lieutenant colonel, a lieutenant colonel is probably about 40 years old, that lieutenant colonel who comes into the chairman's office may be there for the first time, and probably it could be the last time. There's not every day that a lieutenant colonel interfaces with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So I always stop before we start naturally they come in, they know you're busy, they whip out the dreaded PowerPoint slide deck, and they try to jump right in. And I'd say, whoa, wait a minute. I said, who are you? And, well, my name is Colonel so-and-so. Where are you from? And you could see them getting nervous because they, come on, I got to get into this briefing because they told me I only got 10 minutes. And you have any kids? We kids play any sports? And I did that to, first of all, give them a memory about meeting the chairman and having the chairman be a person, not just a title. And also to make sure they knew I valued them as an individual, not just as another uniform. There's so many ways you can give people, writing notes. I used to write notes, at least 4 or 5 of them a day. And you'd say, well, who the hell do you write notes to every day? I don't know. I mean, no. My staff they were great. I'd say, look, if somebody gets promoted, somebody has a baby, somebody, gets engaged, somebody loses a parent, make sure you tell me about that. And you can find out easy now on Facebook, right? I mean, everything's on Facebook. So I would handwrite a note, sorry about your loss. I'm sure your mom was really proud of you. And I know for sure that, how proud you are of her. And it takes 30 seconds to write a note to somebody. But it's a memory that lasts a lifetime, So, look, I don't have all the answers, except that the principle here is to give people memories. And the more memories you give them, the more committed they become to you as a leader and to whatever you're trying to accomplish for the organization.
Yeah. So I once heard you say that the key to being interviewed successfully is to answer the question you wish you were asked.
I just did that.
Well done.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I figured you'd catch me, but. Yeah.
So, which brings me to another question, which is your use of humor. And I guess as I've heard you over the years, you're a very funny person. You use humor very effectively. Typically, you are the butt of your joke. And so I'm curious, are you just like a naturally funny guy, or are you really thinking about using humor in a strategic way?
Yeah, I don't think it's a kind of a manipulative thing. I mean, first of all, I really get a kick out of myself, So, but I will tell you this: even in places like the Situation Room, humor can be a real asset because things can get really tense in there. In fact, they're always tense, and when something gets to the President of the United States. All the easy things have been kind of peeled off by that point. So it's some pretty heavy stuff. I'll give you one example. It was one of these meetings, and it was about ISIS. It felt like it was always about ISIS. But we're talking about ISIS, and the emotions are really high. Certain members of the National Security Council are arguing for more. Others are arguing for less. I mean, Again, this is the government, and by the way, I want you to know that I actually left government, at least the executive branch of government, positive about the way that happens. So the president is sitting there, and he's got his national economic advisor telling him what the impact of something's going to be, and his military advisor, his foreign policy advisor, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense. The guy from the Office of Management and Budget who owns the purse strings, his legislative affairs person who's going to talk about how it's going to play on the Hill. And you can see that what the president's doing is what presidents are supposed to do. He's taken the advice of his various counselors, all of whom are speaking in terms of what's possible in their lane, and he's kind of creating a mosaic or putting filter. If anybody has been to the eye doctor, how they always say, is it this clearer or is that clearer? Is this clearer or is that clearer? And I always screw that up, by the way. Lose confidence that I actually know. The only thing worse than that is going into a hearing test, and I just keep pushing the goddamn thing. But anyway, so there's the president, and he's watching these filters come and go, and at some point he has to make a decision. That's the way it should work. But anyway, one of those points, we were talking about ISIS, and I finally decided that I had a break. We were kind of at an impasse, and I had to break it. And I said, look, Mr. President, I said, these conversations about ISIS, frankly, have become a little tedious because we're missing the point that ISIS is it's just today's manifestation of what is a much deeper, broader problem in the Middle East. You know, failed states, you know, grotesque lack of governance and oppression and failure to allow representative governments, huge inequalities of, you know, wealth. I said, those are the real underlying issues. And what ISIS has done is take advantage of those, especially the religious differences, and has, you know, begun to manifest itself. But I said, even if we eliminate ISIS today, you know, if we don't, with our partners, don't get after those other issues, then, you know, 18 months from now, there'll be another group with another acronym, and might be like the OMB. Now, OMB was the Office of Management and Budget, and I used to hate the guy because he was always, you know, he's actually a good guy, Sean Donovan, but he was always, you know, trying to figure out if he could take money away from the Defense Department. So I said, you know, next thing you know, it'll be called OMB, and he went, But I mean, it's that kind of thing where, you know, you just need to, at some point, you need to, I mean, some of you've heard I actually sing a bit, and people say, why do you do that? Two reasons, really. One is, the hardest thing for a really senior leader to do is to be seen as approachable and human. I mean, you just, you know, you can't imagine how, and in the military it's even worse because you actually wear everything that makes you an imposing figure. So you walk into a room and you got medals all over the place, and, you know, most of which are actually for perfect attendance, but you still wear them. And you've got, you know, you got 4 stars that, you know, that are blinding people across the table, and it's just, you know, it's just who we are. We get a kick out of it, but it can be a little intimidating. And second, and so you're not really seen as normal, whatever normal is, or approachable. And so, you know, every once in a while I'll just belt out a song, and people, you know, people will say, wow, maybe he's not as intimidating as we thought.
Did you ever sing to the president?
Yes. And in fact, at one point we were actually taunting each other, because you may remember that he breaks out in song every once in a while. And anytime he would, in the next meeting I'd say, Mr. President, that was about a C+ at best, you know? And then anytime he was with me, he'd say, you know, I promise you I won't let Marty sing today. And, you know, so we had this back and forth on singing.
Yeah. So shifting gears a bit, back to the sense of what you need to offer people and create for them. It also relates to transitions in life. So as you think about, you stayed in the military for many years. The people in this room may stay with an organization for many, many years, or they may transition and pivot to a new company. But this role of belonging and meaning, can you talk about that transition for you? How do you continue to find a sense of belonging and meaning, having moved out of this role where you were, according to Time magazine, one of the 100 most important people in the world?
Yeah, by the way, I was listed in that Time magazine between Kanye West and Kim Jong-un, so. No, really. That's a true story. If you go back and look at it comes out like in April or May of every year. And in 2015, you know, there I was in between Kanye West and Kim Jong-un. But anyway, you mean me personally, or do you mean?
Yeah, because I mean, I think this is an issue that everyone has to think through. How do they make sure that they maintain that sense of purpose in their lives?
Well, I mean, look, first of all, your point is a good one. I mean, I stayed in the same organization for 41 years, but the organization itself was in constant transition. I mean, you know, look at so from when I came in until I left, we went through a huge period of trying to address issues like race and drugs. Most recently, we went through a transition with the rescinding Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We went through a transition. We're in a transition now in allowing women greater opportunities in the military. It's all very exciting. But but the way transitions become manageable is if they're done with a moral compass. There's got to be a moral compass. And one of our moral compass kind of waypoints or guideposts is equality and diversity. We embrace it. We try to represent and look like the country that we serve. So to your point, as I matriculated out of that singular experience of 41 years in the military, I decided that I would only do things where I would be proud to be part of an organization because it had that same shared sense of the principles that I had used to guide my life up to that point, which is how I end up here at Duke, because Duke's values and the commitment to build leaders of consequence, to have an instinct for social responsibility, those are the right instincts, it seems to me. Same thing with the NBA. Adam Silver, Duke graduate, has done, I think, a fantastic job of establishing the National Basketball Association as both a domestic but global leader in issues related to social responsibility. And so to answer your question, you all probably will, by the way. I'll bet you there's not 3 people in the room that'll stay in the same organization your whole career. It's just not the way your generation, and that's fine. I mean, it doesn't mean that my path was better than your path. Your path is just far more dynamic. And I know that because of my own children, by the way. Only one of them, all 3 of them were commissioned, but only one of them is in the same, kind of path I was in. The other 2 are entrepreneurial and doing quite well at it. But they're entrepreneurial with kind of left and right boundaries, left and right, like on a road, the shoulders. They kind of try to stay in the middle and work for organizations that not only will help them increase their own personal wealth, but also will help be responsible. So I think, the answer to your question is these pivots or transitions, first of all, they're expected, they're frequent, but they can't be willy-nilly. You got to have something that's pulling you along, whatever that is.
So you've come out publicly against a transition that some retired military leaders have made, which is the idea of taking a public stance on political candidates. Why are you so opposed to retired military officers getting in the endorsement business?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons, really. One is, if you study, as I have, the role and relationship, the role of the military in a democratic society, and the relationship with the American people, that role requires us to be nonpartisan. By the way, not apolitical. Nobody's apolitical. Everybody in this room believes that one or another of the candidates or one or the other of the parties is either more or less on the right side of history. You just do. I do too. So we're not asking anyone to be apolitical. I mean, for one thing, we have to exercise our right to vote, but we have to be nonpartisan. And what that means is that we can't be in the business of trying to influence elections. Why? 2 reasons. One is, as I said, we have a special relationship with the American people. Second, and we shouldn't be in the business of confusing the American people by suggesting that one candidate or the other will be better or worse than the other. But the second reason is probably even more important. That is, what makes our government work, just as I've said, what makes your organizations work, is trust. Now, if I'm sitting in that room with the President of the United States, and I have a bunch of retired general, and I'm singling out generals and admirals, by the way, because you're a general or an admiral for life. I mean, just tonight I was introduced as General Dempsey, not the Frank Sinatra look-alike that I am. So.
And sound alike, yeah.
Yeah, right. And so that's a title that stays with you for life. It just does. And so if you're the president and you're listening to all this chatter by retired generals and admirals, all of whom are, expounding on who's got it right and who's got it wrong and who's going to be better and who's going to be worse, it can help, but but reflect back into the relationship you have with those currently serving. And one of my principles is never make my successor's job any harder than it needs to be. And I could make it a lot harder were I to be critical, were I to be partisan. And so I just think to maintain our relationship with the people of America, and by the way, especially in times when emotions are so high. I mean, emotions are running white hot right now politically. And the last thing we should see happen is that the military gets washed into that. And then the second thing is, you know what? We had our turn. We had our chance. We did our best. There's a whole group of men and women that actually we've mentored doing it now, and let them do it. You know what I mean? Let them do what they've got to do for the country and not get involved in it.
Okay, I'm going to ask one last question. So fair warning, I'm going to turn it over to the audience for the following questions. And the question is that it seems like all over the world, and regardless of where you are in the political spectrum, there has been this move away from the value of globalization.
Yeah.
And so from your vantage point, how do you see that trend? Do you think that we can retreat from a world where we are so globally connected?
No, it's inconceivable. And it would be very ill-advised to do so. And let me elaborate a bit, although that's probably, doctoral thesis quality question right there. I think, first of all, I've studied for at least the last 2 or 3 years, the nature of power. What does it mean to have power? Of course, our national power is defined as the aggregate of military power, economic power, diplomatic power, informational power, which is really to say reputational power. And there's a tendency when things become complex and confusing to believe that power and control are synonymous. They're not. In fact, the world that feels like, to me, we live in, and that continues to evolve, is one where the more we try to control it, the more we try to maintain power by exerting control, the less likely it is we're going to be able to maintain power. Because control has become overwhelmingly expensive. I mean, even in terms of resources necessary. I'll use national security as the example. Although you could use the energy sector, you could use healthcare, you can use education. The problem we've got from a national security perspective is we've got about 5 competing security challenges. And notice I said challenges, not conflicts. Only one of them is a conflict, and that's the conflict with ISIS. But we've also got a challenge to make sure that the rise of China in the Pacific and our interests there are protected, that the Russian assertiveness doesn't affect Eastern Europe and our NATO allies, that Iran does stay on a path to be less provocative in the Middle East, and that North Korea doesn't become a regional, they're already a destabilizing factor regionally. We want to make sure they don't become a destabilizing factor globally. But the point is we've got 5 big problems, any one of which you could decide is the most important problem, and you could flow all your resources there, and next thing you know, you find yourself, missing something else that's happening someplace else. It's not conceivable that we could do all that ourselves. It's just not conceivable. I mean, there's the national budget won't support it, the American people won't support it. And by the way, it wouldn't work if we were doing everything unilaterally. We would create an environment where not only would our motivations be questioned, but I think you'd find that those who normally see the United States as a nation to be admired would then quickly see it as a nation to be feared. So that's not going to happen. So what is going to happen? What's going to happen is we've got to find a way to share these problems. And to do that, this is the controversial part. To preserve our power and our standing globally, we're going to have to relinquish control and share responsibility in a collaborative way. That's the reality, not the idea that we're going to do everything ourselves. It's just not possible. Okay. And you could say the same thing in the energy sector vis-a-vis, fossil fuels and renewables and the relationship of industry and customers. It's changing, and it's changing to where these big monolithic nation states and corporations are having to relinquish control to preserve power. It's almost counterintuitive, but it's real.
Okay, let's turn to the audience.
Oh, there they are. I've dazzled them.
I don't
that or
think
they
there's
recognize
nothing
that
left to be said.
the sooner they stop talking, the sooner they go home.
Thanks for coming, General Dempsey. Just a quick question. You were talking about lighting fires earlier on. Can you tell a story either about somebody lighting a fire in you or you lighting a fire in somebody junior?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is the stuff that books are made of, right? But I remember as a captain, I was just arrived at Fort Carson, Colorado in 1979. And the squadron commander, I was a cavalryman, so the squadron commander was a guy named Jim McQuain, a Norwich grad. And I was the battalion motor officer, which is to say I had responsibility for the maintenance of all of the heavy armored vehicles that we had in the unit. Probably 250 vehicles, maybe. It was a pretty big job, and I actually enjoyed it. You know, it was just one of those hands-on things that you could see progress every day as you got a vehicle running again. And of course, everybody kept breaking them, but at least you could see you could see progress. But anyway, so one day he was bringing through the two-star general. The two-star general on Fort Carson wanted to come and visit our motor pool. And I had been in a unit previously where any time a two-star general came, nobody talked to him except the commander, the lieutenant colonel. You know, the lieutenant colonel dominated the general. He was leading him around and making sure he didn't see anything he shouldn't see or hear anything he shouldn't hear. And in this case, in comes the two-star general with the lieutenant colonel, Jim McQuain, and this lieutenant colonel says, "Okay, Lieutenant Dempsey, why don't you talk, I forget the general's name now, Hudacek, why don't you talk General Hudacek through what you're doing here in the motor pool?" I thought, what? You know, why am I talking? And what just happened? And holy crap, I'm not ready for this, actually. But afterwards, I said to the colonel, I said, you know, that was a curveball. He said, why? And I said, well, normally, you know, people of your rank do most of the talking. He said, that's why I wanted you to do the talking. And that was actually and you know, it really lifted me up that he had the trust in me to talk to this two-star about our unit. And in so doing, by the way, it would reflect on him. And he didn't tell me in advance. And I thought that was a real statement of trust. And so that's why I always tried my story earlier about making sure that everybody at every level feels valued, I think is a real important leadership trait.
Thank you for your time today, sir. I just had a question regarding your statement about relinquishing control to preserve power, particularly in a corporate context. And I was curious how you would see that happening in your mind or where you've seen that happen before.
Yeah, I mean, I could give you a military example, but I find the most powerful example is one I just came on recently. The dean and a couple of others invited me to sit in on a session with an organization here called EDGE. I don't know if any of you have been exposed to it, but they bring in the energy sector. What does it stand for?
Energy development and the global environment.
Yeah,
Whew.
and well done. Yeah, or at least that's what it stands for now. Yeah. But they brought in these traditional utility companies. There's probably 900 of them in the country, but there's probably 9 that are heavy hitters. And the conversation was about this idea of leader development and control. And as you know, it wasn't too long ago where these big utilities were almost monopolies in the regions of the country in which they operate, and they still are heavily regulated, but they were literally, you know, monopolies. And so what's happened over time is as renewables have become, two things have happened. Renewables have become more effective and more efficient. But also, as you know, the United States has signed on to various international agreements that will cause us to dramatically reduce our fossil fuel footprint by 2050, I think. So the big traditional energy corporations, some of them are going in the direction of trying to retain power by seizing control. Others are actually looking to preserve power by relinquishing control and doing things with their customers, for example, allowing customer-designed energy requirements, encouraging customers to take on renewables, but not just for themselves, but so that they can actually bring energy into the grid. So in an interesting and powerful way, some of these traditional utilities, gas and electric, are actually relinquishing control and trying to empower the edge being their customers. And in so doing, they'll actually be able to preserve their standing. And it's fascinating. And I actually think that model is more a model applicable to the future than one in which you think it's a simple matter of just reasserting your dominance in a particular enterprise.
Good evening, General. My question was with regards to leadership. It's challenging enough to be an effective and respectable leader when public opinion is positive towards you. How do you maintain that respect, and how do you continue to be a good leader when public opinion has turned against you?
Yeah, well, that's kind of the man in the mirror question, right? I mean, you know, not the Michael Jackson man in the mirror, but although that's actually about the same thing. You know, public opinion is really a fickle thing, and it can be influenced in so many different ways. So I will say that part of the responsibility of a leader is, you know, in Fuqua, I've learned the term sense making. I don't know if I got it from Sim or someone, but the idea that it's one of a leader's inherent responsibilities to make sense of things for those who they employ. And if you are good at that, then you will influence public opinion. So that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is that public opinion matters, especially, you know, in an enterprise where you're relying on the public to buy your product or something. But if you're in government, or in my case in the military, public opinion is, let's say, a little less important in terms of the direction you're going, because you know, they are our customers, but there's no commodities exchanged with the military. It's just a matter of reputational influence, right? So what I always tried to do was remember what we're trying to accomplish, recognizing that the media, which has largely in this country become partisan. I mean, the unfortunate reality of the media is that there's very few of them that I think, I'm not sure you could actually describe any of them as nonpartisan. I mean, they've all got a particular belief, you know, code of beliefs that colors the way they present the news, which is one of the reasons I always tell audiences like you, I don't know where your political leanings are, but make sure you watch the other channel on occasion, just to make sure you get a little balance in your life in terms of what you're hearing. And it's unbelievable, no, it shouldn't be unbelievable, but it's still surprising to me that I can hear two stories about the same thing reported on two different networks and have a completely different outcome. But to your point, and to end this, because this is, again, another one of those really long questions, I think that if you're grounded in those principles that define you individually and the organization you lead, then you won't be cast from side to side by changes in the media perception. On the other hand, look, I'm a fan of the media. After everything I said, you're probably thinking, really? You're a fan of? Of course I am. I mean, they are the kind of the frontline soldiers in educating the American people on the issues of the day, which is a huge responsibility. Some of them do it well, and some of them do it less well. But I never blamed them or fought them or criticized them. I tried to be consistent with them. And I do think, you know, when they identify a problem, and if it is a problem, the best thing to do is acknowledge it, and acknowledge it quickly, and try to fix it. And never make statements in the media unless you're sure. But you got to be sure quick. I talked today to I talked to some individual students today, and I used the phrase that, you know, you're living in a world that's moving at the speed of memes. And if you think about it, that's absolutely true. You have to pace yourself as a leader today, especially when something's being done or said about your organization, at the speed at which a meme can be created parallel to it and moving, and memes move fast. So, I mean, look, I'll give you an example, because I think examples might be better than leaving it abstract. At the military academy last spring, there was a group of African-American women graduates who, every year we take pictures of the graduates as individuals, as groups, and they do it in an old-fashioned setting with, our uniforms are old anyway, old, I mean, they're literally throwbacks to the, you know, to the beginning of the 18th century, or 19th century. Anyway, and then in front of an old building, and it's kind of black and white photo, and it's you know, just another remembrance or reflection of the fact that we have this long gray line, this long history of service. And so these young African-American female graduates all raised their fists. Now the interpretation immediately, this is all back when the Black Lives Matter movement was at its height. The interpretation was immediately that they were aligning themselves with a political movement, which is not consistent with the way remember I told you, we're nonpartisan. And so there was this, within hours, not days, within hours, there was this huge pouring in of criticism. And there was this huge pouring in of support. And so the superintendent, I have a great relationship with the superintendent of the military academy, and he called me up. I'm retired, of course, and he called me up and said, "Hey, you got any advice?" I said, "No, but do it quickly." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "This thing is, by the time, if you don't do something today, make a statement, you know, do something. You know, announce that you're going to do something, but do something." Because I said, this thing will completely get away from you. And so, to his great credit, he convened a very quick review, interviewed the 9 cadets in question, came to the correct conclusion that they were not aligning themselves with any political movement, but were actually quite proud of the fact that they had managed to get through West Point as African-American females, which is no small task even today. And he simply educated them on the implications of symbols, and that was it. And he announced that, and the story went like this: dead. But if he hadn't done that, we'd still be talking about it. So you live life, and when you're in these positions of responsibility, you're going to live your lives at the speed of memes, because those memes are actually getting quicker. Anybody not know what a meme is, by the way? There's one guy back there. Somebody help that guy.
Okay.
Chewbacca mom. Yeah.
All right. Well, sadly, we've come to the end of our time. So,
General Dempsey, we wanted to thank you so much for your time and
Thank
wisdom
you.
shared tonight, and we'd like to extend a small token of our appreciation.
Well, I'm an employee. Can I accept this?
Yes, you can. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.